Well, good morning and welcome to the Science Court 2021 Science Court trial. My name is Tadmor. I will start the proceedings, but then I'll turn it over to our students who will be running most of the day. So let me begin by sharing a presentation with you. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see that. Again, my name is Tadmor. This is Science Court, which is a program run out of the University of Minnesota, where we pick controversial topics, research them, and then argue them in a mock trial in front of a jury of citizens. I'll tell you all about a little bit about that, and then we'll turn over to that. I want to introduce the other other instructors who are involved in making this happen. Lauren Klatch, who's a JD, PhD, almost done, a social psychology student at the University of Minnesota. CJ Sinner, who's the data visuals editor at the Star Tribune. Bill McGinnis, retired patent attorney from IBM, who's a mock trial judge, very active in the mock trial program here in the United States. Corey Fleck, a PhD student of social psychology at the University of Minnesota, and Jeremy Rose, who's a senior lecturer in the College of Liberal Arts Communication Studies program, who works with our juries. This is run as a program out of the University Honors Program at the University of Minnesota, and most of the students in this class are honor students. So let me start by very briefly telling you what Science Court is, although since you're here, you may already know this. Science Court is an adaptation of the US jury system, and the aim of the entire project is to combat polarization and the stress that US democracy is under these days. Now, unlike a regular trial, our objectives in Science Court is not to determine the guilt or innocence of somebody who's on trial, but rather to use that mechanism as a way of generating effective deliberation and decision-making on complex issues, bringing people together that have different points of view. So what we do in the trial, in the class, is that we pick a complicated issue, and we have a whole process for doing that I won't go into. We then, once we picked our topic, we identify the knowledge domains that impact it. There are all sorts of questions related to the issue under different categories like policy, economics, sociology, etc. And you can see from this list that although we have science in our name, Science Court, this isn't limited to the hard sciences. It also includes the social sciences and other domains that are relevant, like law, policy, and so on, that all inform the issue. Once we've identified these domains, we investigate them. We investigate the questions that are under each of these domains. And this is a feedback process where we identify domains, we ask questions that may lead to other domains, which leads to other questions. And the entire semester is a systematic process to develop the cases as best as we can. Once we've developed it, we argue it in front of a jury of citizens, as I said, in a mock trial, where we're presenting the pros and cons of the argument. Now, throughout the semester, as this is happening, there's a media component where high quality media is constantly being created to describe the process that we're going through. It's a sort of, we have a little newsroom basically that's following the process of preparing for trial, identifying what are the interesting research that's come up, what's been going on, who's been visiting us and giving us feedback, and so on. And that comes out on our website that you can see above here, scicourt.umn.edu. It comes out as a podcast where we have regular episodes coming out, their video pieces and so on. And really the objective there is to engage the public as much as possible and educate them about this issue along with us as we're learning it for the trial. Now the work, as I said, is done by the students taking the class. Those students are divided into three teams. The science team in the class is responsible for doing the research, for finding the physical and social science research data, research that's relevant and reliable data. So the only information that's allowed in the trial is scientifically sound information, meaning it comes from either peer-reviewed sources or it comes from data that's been verified to be reliable. Our students this year are David Ashley, Philip Dowdell, Jenny Lim, Mannix White, and Minerva Zoe. On the legal team is responsible for coming up with the pro and the con arguments for whatever case we're studying that year. This year, the legal team is Andrew Bremner, Nishant Satpathy, Madeline Stankiewicz, and Arun Sundaralingam. And then on our media team, the media team is responsible for creating the content, as I said. And we have Hannah Haikrioni, Jessica Jursic, and Matt Simonson. And as you can see on the bottom with the little logos there, one of the nice things about Science Court is that it's interdisciplinary across the entire university. We have students from the College of Science and Engineering, College of Liberal Arts, the College of Food and Agriculture, and the College of Education and Human Development this year. And so a huge mix of backgrounds and interests, and all of these students come together to work as a team and really enrich each other in the process. And us as the instructors, we also are interdisciplinary. It's really a wonderful experience. Now, a Science Court case, any year we do it, has the same format. We describe some of the course statement or the statement that we're arguing. Well, let me say another way. The issue that we're studying is expressed as a case statement, which has the following form. There's a descriptive and objective and a proposed solution to it. Now, the way we argue it at the trial is that you'll see today is that we have a pro and a con arguing it, but this isn't like a debate where the pro team is arguing for the motion and the con team is trying to knock it down. Our experience has shown that that's not an effective way of debating an issue. Rather, what we do is the pro team is arguing for a proposal along the lines of what's proposed in blue up there. And then the con team is arguing for a counter proposal, which is more along the status quo. How can we solve the issue, the objective, but without something as radical as the proposed solution is? That's the typical kinds of cases that we do. So this year, our case statement is to fight polarization in American society, a mandatory national service should be adopted. And so the pro team will be arguing for a mandatory service, and the con team, you'll see in a minute, will be arguing for a voluntary service, expanding existing voluntary services. The domains we've identified throughout the semester for this there are 5 domains: economics, health, sociology, psychology, and education. There are subtopics under each of these domains. For example, under economics, we have what is the cost of polarization to our society, and then what are the cost and benefits of service programs, national service programs. Under health, we have what are the polarization effects of health, what is the effect of polarization on the health of the public, and what is the effect of service programs on the health of the public. And then sociology, we'll talk about American identity, political polarizations, and Americans' view on service. Under psychology, the issue of what makes an individual identity, what is leading to racial polarization, and context theory, which is our main mechanism for addressing this. And then under education, service outcomes and international service program benefits. So I'll give you just a little bit of background on polarization that sort of underlies everything so that the other teams don't have to keep repeating this basic information. And so this is all about polarization, and of course, Science Court in general is about polarization, but this particular year, we're also talking about how a direct plan to address it. Aside for Science Court itself, which is also a plan to address it, but that's a different issue. So if we turn to a dictionary and we look at what is polarization, the definition is a state in which the opinions, beliefs, or interests of a group or society no longer range along a continuum, but become concentrated at opposing extremes. You'll see in a minute that's when you think about American polarization, or polarization of American society, it's a little bit subtle, actually, what's going on. So keep that definition in mind. Now, there are many different kinds of polarization in the United States and in other countries as well. We're not the only country that's suffering from these problems these days. Political polarization, of course, racial polarization, in fact, has been at the forefront in recent days, and in particular, Minnesota has been kind of at the top of the news with respect to this. Economic polarization, geographic polarization, and I could go on. Many of these things are related to each other, but to focus our thinking, we're primarily going to focus or entirely focus on political or racial polarization and not deal explicitly by looking at research on the other topics. Now, before I continue, I want to take a minute or two and show you a short video piece that our media team put together. We call it an explainer piece. Basically gives the at the beginning of the semester, when we were thinking about this, this is the view of polarization that we have. So I'll play this and then I'll go back to finish up.
What do magnets and present-day American society have in common? They're both polarized. Polarization can take a lot of different forms, each of which essentially boils down to a division of a group in two distinct directions. While they're all important, we'll be focusing on political and racial polarization in Science Court. Political and racial polarization aren't new in the United States. They go all the way back to the country's founding. Polarization between Democrats and Republicans has been increasing for at least a decade, according to Pew Research Center, and 2020 was no exception. Former President Trump's 2 Senate impeachment trial votes were split almost perfectly along party lines. The 2020 election saw record voter turnout, and there were months of conflict over the final result, leading to an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Racial polarization also continues to be very visible in the United States. Numerous Black Lives Matter protests across the country, followed by the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, as a long history of racial inequity reached a boiling point. Polarization makes society messy, but that doesn't mean everyone is on board to eliminate it. Politicians, for example, can benefit from a charged and motivated electorate who are determined to keep the other side out of office at all costs. Science Court is researching the facts, with the goal of developing solutions to polarization, so that we can move toward an America that, like magnets, sticks together. Follow along throughout the semester on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Okay, so that I think provides a very nice background to the issues that we're dealing with. To just give you some specific details, there's no doubt that American politics has become more polarized. This is a plot showing something called the DW nominate score, which goes from minus 0.5 to 0.5. Minus 0.5 is most liberal to most conservative at 0.5. And what are plotted here are the voting records of House and Senate Republicans and House and Senate Democrats. And you can see that, well, not surprisingly, the Republicans are more conservative. But the thing is, you see that they become more conservative, significantly more conservative starting around the 1980s. And similarly, Democrats have become significant, people in Congress have become significantly more liberal over actually going back all the way to the 1930s. The thing, though, the interesting thing is that this is not reflective of Americans. And this plot shows the share of adults that identify themselves as conservative, liberal, and moderate. And you see that that's basically stable. The number of liberals, the number of moderates, the number of conservatives from the 1970s until today are more or less stable. And so we have this polarization happening in Congress, in politicians, but not in the public when you look at the public as large. And so the question is, what is going on here? And it has to do with this issue of party sorting, or at least that's one of the reasons. So the political parties have become much more ideologically cohesive. You can see here if you look at the Republicans in Congress and the Democrats in Congress, you see that there was a significant amount of overlap between them in the 1970s. And so there were liberal Republicans and there were conservative Democrats, and there was a fair amount of overlap, which led to the cooperation that existed in politics. And that has really separated over the years, so that here in the beginning of the 2010s, 2011, 2012, the two parties were really quite separate. And Americans have followed along with that and have sorted themselves. And so this amounted to people leaving one party and joining another party, or simply adopting the views, readjusting their views to fit the views of their whatever party they belong to. And so Americans that used to have a lot of overlap, you look through the years how they become more and more separate. And now or not now, but in 2017, the division is quite stark, much wider between them, difference. And so that's happening within the parties, but you saw that overall in the society, Americans are not more polarized than before, but the parties are. And that's led to this phenomenon of a party as a social identity. It goes beyond politics now. And the political parties have turned into these sorts of exclusive clubs with a strong us versus them philosophy. And so not only do people disagree with the views of the other parties, the other party is now seen as hypocritical, selfish, and closed-minded. There's an unwillingness to cooperate, even socialize with people from the other party. They're seen as the enemy, as not just political rivals. And the technical term for this in psychology and sociology for this animosity between the parties is called affective or affective polarization. Affective coming from affect, related to emotion. And so there are measures, and you'll hear about that later in the day, there are measures for quantifying this affective polarization. And one of them is a temperature measure, where you're asking people how they feel towards other people, and it's on a warmth scale from 0 being very cold and you don't like them to 100 being warm and supportive. And you see that the lines here, the blue and the red lines on top, are Democrat and Republican in-party sentiment. And that has more or less stayed stable from the 1980s until today, meaning people still have a high warmth towards people from their own party. There's been some sliding here in the Republican Party in recent years, but overall it's, I would say, relatively stable. But the out-of-party sentiment, you see there's a significant decline. And so that means that people feel much more animosity, much colder towards people from the other party now than they did, say, in the 1980s. And so how do we address this? I mean, what is a solution to polarization? Of course, that's the $64,000 question. That's what everybody wants to solve. But what the research shows is that there's a few techniques that are helpful. One is correcting misconceptions about the other group. Another is building identities that transcend party identity, like we're all Americans as opposed to we're Democrats or Republicans, and constructive engagement between groups, where things like contact theory can be helpful in designing those to be effective. So you could do those things in many different ways. And in this particular trial, we're focused on one particular proposal or suggestion, which is to use national service programs as a method for applying these ideas to address polarization. Now, as I said in the beginning, the pro side is going to argue for a mandatory national service. All Americans in some age range will be conscripted and are forced to serve in a way that is designed to address this. Whereas the con side is arguing for an incentive-based voluntary national service program, building on existing programs and expanding and adding new ones to them. Both sides, well, actually, that's true for both sides, are going to build on existing programs. The difference is how they're all put together and how the public is incentivized or forced to participate. Now, just a point here to prevent any questions along these lines, what we're not going to do in this trial is worry about legal or constitutional aspects of either the mandatory or voluntary service approach. Though those are technical questions, our point of view is that if there's a strong desire within Congress, within society to adopt one of these goals, the solution will be fine to make them happen. Our mission here is just to determine what would be the best course of action, not how feasible are the constitutional aspects of it or legal aspects of it. All right, so our schedule is as follows. We're in the middle of this introduction right now. This is our schedule for today. We'll then have opening pro and con statements, opening statements by the pro and con team, I'm trying to say. And then we'll have a series of short sessions, each focused on a particular aspect of the problem. They'll start with a short presentation by the science team, about 5 minutes, and then there'll be questions by the lawyers, statements by the lawyers where they try and give their interpretation of what you just heard, and then we'll open it for questions by the jury and the audience. And then we'll keep repeating this with breaks in between to let everybody rest a little bit. There'll be short 5-minute breaks every hour or so, and then we'll have a break for lunch. Yeah, the break for lunch is here, 12 to 12:30. We're going to try and stick to the schedule, but you can already hear from what I'm saying that this is going to be very dynamic with lots of questions and moving parts. So we may kind of drift off our official schedule a little bit here and there. We're breaking it down in this way to make it easier for people to absorb the information. And I also wanted to point out that every bit of information, as I said, is researched, and you'll see next to things on the slides by the science team, you'll see things like codes like this. Those are basically indicators of the person who found the research source and the number. So LC01 might be source 1 found by Lauren Klatch, right? And so on. And at the end of the presentations, there's the full references are given to these citations. Okay, we'll end with closing statements by the pro and con team, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end where any additional questions that we were not able to handle during the day or new questions have come up will be addressed. We'll also have a little segment that I forgot to mention here, where if there's a question that a science team student couldn't answer on the spot, they'll research it while the other sessions are going on, and at the end of the day, we'll come back to them to get an update. So feel free to ask questions, even if they're not discussed. Now, a few instructions I want to give to the jury. Part of the participants in this webinar are jury members. Your names, you have been renamed. You may have noticed that you've been renamed with the word jury ahead of your name. That's not displayed to anybody else, but internally we use that information to identify jury questions, which we will prioritize over audience questions or combine them in some way. Your job, the jury, is to select between the pro and con proposals as described. You can't say, oh, I like the pro proposal, but I'm going to add this bells and whistles here. Your job is to select between those two options. Decisions must be based only on information presented at the trial. Jurors can't bring to the deliberation, which happens tomorrow, by the way. You can't bring additional information or do your own research because that would not have had the opportunity to be vetted like the information that we presented. At the deliberation itself, the jurors will get a list of questions, a question for each session they'll answer whether they think the pro or the con side was stronger on that particular issue. And that will help frame the deliberation and to decide the overall decision based on the relative importance of the different issues. Everything you're going to see today will be posted online. This will be available for the jurors in deliberation, but for everybody. You'll all have access to the recordings of this webinar as well as the presentations that were made. And we encourage the jurors to take notes. As you're hearing what's going on, we found that taking notes is very helpful to the jurors during the deliberation to remember what they were thinking and any questions that they had and answered. Okay, and this is my last slide, just some technical details. We recommend that you do not leave the webinar in the middle if you need to take a break or something, but leave it running just because there's been, Zoom is known or it has been known for people leaving Zoom webinars to have problems re-entering. If you do run into problems, Matt Simonson has agreed, from the media team, has agreed to provide technical support, so you can email him. Maybe Lauren, you want to put that in the chat, his email. If you want to ask a question, if you're a member of the jury or the audience and you want to ask a question, you should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You click on that and post your question. You should do the following. Indicate who you're addressing the question to, whether it's the science presentation or the legal pro or con team. If you're referring to a presentation, it's very helpful if you can give a slide number. So maybe jot that down. Due to time constraints, we can't answer everything, and we might merge similar questions. And as I said, we'll try to return to unanswered questions at the end of the day. We've set the way that the webinar is set up that questions can't be anonymous. However, we will not mention any names when your question is given. The way this will work is that the CJ Sinner will be moderating the Q&A. She will be reviewing questions, consolidating them, and then sending them to our judge, Bill McGinnis. And Bill will ask the question of whoever you ask the question to, without mentioning the source of the question. So that's the process we'll be following. Finally, a detailed schedule of the day is available at this link. Again, maybe Lauren, you can put this in the chat. And so you can click on this and see where we are. Just remember that there might be a little bit of drift because of just the nature of this event. Okay, so with that, where's the time? I'm basically on time, which is a miracle. If there are any general questions, we can take them right now before we move on to the pro opening statement.